So our next presenter up after lunch, we're going to transition away from agronomy for a minute or two to talk more about marketing, because we need to talk about everything when it comes to the PEI, the potato industry, and the PEI Potato Conference. Even my agronomist hat has to say we have to talk about some other very important topics as well. So thankfully, we have Victoria Stamper here from United Potato Growers of Canada. Many of you have heard Victoria before. She's no stranger to PEI the last couple of years for different presentations. She's a graduate of the University of Guelph with a Bachelor of Commerce in Marketing after growing up in London, Ontario. She now resides in Quebec, and she's been with the UPGC since April of 2022. And she spends a lot of time on the meeting season circuit this time of year, speaking to growers all across Canada, as well as gathering information about the industry, about marketing, disposition, that sort of thing, and getting that back out to growers so that you guys can make decisions or better inform your marketing decisions. So I'll turn it over to you, Victoria.
Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you very much, Ryan, for the very nice introduction, and of course for inviting me to speak here today. As you'll see later in the presentation, two of our core values really are communication and collaboration. So these types of meetings are super important for United to be able to not only give the communication to the growers, but to receive the feedback from the growers to better inform our analysis across Canada. So we appreciate you being here today and participating today and giving me your feedback. I will be at my booth out at the front for the rest of the day, so please feel free to stop by and ask any specific questions you might have. So I just want to put the timer on so I don't get lost here. So it's nice to see some familiar faces and actually to be able to say that I can see some familiar faces in the crowd. It's been coming up to 3 years I've been in the job and done a lot of traveling across Canada, so it's nice to be actually be able to say I see some familiar faces. And for those friends I haven't met yet, as Ryan said, my name is Victoria Stamper. I'm the General Manager at United Potato Growers of Canada. Hopefully, Ryan gave it a good explanation of what we do. Our mandate really is about collecting the data, analyzing the data, and communicating it back to our members and, of course, the growers to help you make better decisions about the crop. So that's what we're all about. So today we're just going to go through a quick reminder on the potato supply in North America, the holdings and disappearance, the processing sector and seed sector we like to talk about. United has historically been fresh oriented. That's what we talk about, the fresh sector. So some of the numbers will be focused more on the fresh sector. But we do know it's one big potato pile. One of the first things I learned when I came into the job was that saying, and I think the other one from Greg is a rising tide floats all ships, I think is the other one that I always hear. So we'll talk about the potato pile as a whole. We will be talking about that elephant in the room, potential tariffs from the US. I probably could have put one slide and talked 20 minutes to you guys about it, but we'll go through some of the other information as well, and how United is working on your behalf. So just a reminder of kind of where we started this season. There were some adjustments made in January to the production numbers, mostly in Quebec. So we're back up to 128 million, which is close to what we had originally reported post-harvest. So we're back up to that number. We are the record crop this year. It's kind of bounced around a bit based on those changes, but I just wanted to come back to where we are in terms of overall production for Canada. We can definitely see the continued growth of processing in the West. And if I skip to the intended utilization, you can see that based on AAFC's report of last year, 2023-24 season, we are at 68% for the processing sector. So we can see that continued growth, fresh at 21 and seed at 11. In terms of U.S. production, just a quick snapshot, total U.S. production is actually down this year, most of that driven out of the acreage reductions in Washington and Idaho post the year of surplus last year in the processing sector. There was a lot of reductions in processing. And that was a result of 2 years of shortages. Then we kind of swung the pendulum too far the other way, and it's been brought back last year. You can see Michigan, Colorado, and Maine are the only ones posting an increase in production, and most of that is really weather-related, as PEI can attest to, and certainly New Brunswick, Quebec, the weather was definitely better this year than it was last year, and that have impacted those states. So overall, in terms of North American production, we are actually down overall. We are up a bit in Canada, but the decreases in the U.S. brings us down as overall production in the U.S. So where are we at today in terms of the holdings? So these are the total holdings, not just fresh. These are the total holdings. And I had the original trend line for the 5-year average. Typically we do that 5-year average, but I wanted to show it with the 3-year average because we've had such higher production in the last 3 years, just to push it up, because there is a big gap. You can see where total production and total holdings are. The purple line is this year, are past that average, past that well past the 5-year average, and a little bit past the 3-year average. So things are moving well. They're still moving on trend, but we can see that there is that increased production and increased holdings. And that's just based on our continued growth of the potato industry, for the most part in that processing sector. January disappearance, this is based on the AAFC reports. Actually, Greg and I were talking this morning. I said, I'm putting that up on screen, and I don't want a bunch of people in PEI yelling at me because their number's in red. So I know it looks different in terms of the movement is good. The fresh sector is continuing to move. Shipments are on pace. I think part of what we see, the difference there is partly in the fresh, might be in the seed as well. So there are some discussion points there, but you can also see 2024 was a bit of a peak there. So it's not out of line this year in PEI in terms of movement at all, in terms of pace. So those are the numbers that we're seeing, again, based on the AFC holding reports. So if there are errors in the holding reports, then of course it causes errors for me in terms of the data collection. Those are the types of things United is trying to work with the government agencies on to improve that type of data collection. So we'll get into that in a little bit. So moving to the fresh pile. So now this is breaking out sort of the fresh pile. I'm going to just show you, we're trying to, this is what they do in the US, and I'm doing my best, we'll go back, to do this same sort of thing in Canada. So I know it's a bit busy, but basically the top line is the disappearance to date. So based on holdings and production numbers, what we feel has moved to date in the fresh sector. And then the bottom line with the numbers beside it, the yellow one, is sort of where the pace is. Are they ahead of pace or behind pace? So there's only a couple of provinces, Quebec and Ontario and New Brunswick, that are showing a bit behind on fresh. I do need to question the Quebec number because there have been adjustments in their production numbers, so that could be reflecting that pace difference, because I don't think they're as behind as that might show. But there have been, there have been reports December wasn't as great as they thought it would be, and then the post-holiday lull in January, so impacting in terms of the movement. And then on the right, just showing the total shipments in Canada, what we estimate to have disappearance to date. Remembering that disappearance isn't necessarily sales of potatoes. It, of course, does include the cull rate, so that is in there. It's just our total disappearance that we can calculate at this point. And then the seasonal is just based on a 3-year average. So where are we? We're ahead of pace according to our 3-year average estimate, and then what we have left to ship. So we're looking at maybe in the fresh, if we keep the current pace, we would be carrying through until June on the fresh sector. Same sort of thing for the U.S. The good thing is that the pace is high. The pace is ahead of the usual. They have less to ship to start with than they did last year, and the pace is moving very well. Idaho is shipping on average between 750,000 and 1 million hundredweight per week, every week since harvest. So they are shipping hard. Colorado has actually been shipping very hard. They're starting to really look at their pace because they do have some concerns on quality. So not sure that they can keep that pace up moving forward through the rest of the season. So we're going to see how that works with Colorado. So it just gives you an idea of the fresh market in the U.S. and how things are moving. It is a better news story than we sort of thought at harvest. Idaho did not reduce their acreage as much as we would have hoped they did, but the pile is moving very well. And last year, if we were looking at a 3 million hundredweight carryover between crop transition, we might be looking at 1 million at this point. So I know it's still a heck of a lot of potatoes, but it's certainly better than what it was. The process, skipping to the processing sector, basically, contracts are underway. The only ones fully negotiated right now are Washington, but everybody has started having their initial meetings, even second meetings, starting to talk numbers. There are some differences, some people asking for rollover, some people asking for an increase, some people asking or accepting a decrease, depending on their region. So we're going to see how that pans out. That's still very much underway. The tariffs obviously making both processors and growers wary of agreeing too quickly to contractors. Some want to talk about it, some don't. Some feel the processors are going to push it into the conversation. I hope there's none of you in the room and I'm not offending any of you, but it is what it is, and it's something to be talked about and thought about. The good news is, of course, global demand for frozen fries continues to grow unabated. It is at a slower pace than maybe forecast 2 years ago. 2 years ago, it was probably 3 to 4% per year. Now it's about 1 to 2%, but it does continue to grow, and there is a demand there for frozen. In terms of the seed sector, so Canadian certified acres. This is, of course, based on the CFIA numbers on certified acres. So I only do the certified, not the not accepted is not the word I'm looking for, but registered. Thank you. So as we can see, they did go up this year according to CFIA after 2 years of decline. So it has moved up a little bit. There's been a lot of changes in the seed sector. I've only been doing this, as I said, just over 3 years, coming up to 3 years. So, but even 10 years ago, there's a big difference in terms of who's growing seed, where it's being grown, the acres being planted. And, there are concerns. If you look at there's the certified acres by province. But one thing I wanted to put was the trend line. If you look at the trend line on the actual Canadian certified, it's very flat. It's only marginally gone up. I know, sorry, it's not on screen there. It's actually very flat. So is there a concern? Is there something we need to be doing within the seed sector in Canada to make sure that they're well supported and are supporting the other two sectors? So just something to be aware of. There's, as I said, just the acreage per province. So you can see that there are some declining. Most are on the upswing as of recently. And we'll see how that goes forward. There are still reports. I get a lot of reports in terms of the pressure on pricing due to the pressure on cost of production. And are the seed growers, need to be discussing in terms of pricing and how things are going. At United, we don't get into, dictating acreage, talking about acreage or pricing or setting pricing or anything like that. Our goal is just to collect the information and pass it back. But one of the things we are looking more into is having sort of a steering committee for seed within United. Not like the Canadian Potato Council where we're discussing agronomy or other issues related to seed, but really talking about market supply and demand and giving an opportunity for growers, seed and other sectors to get together to talk about what are the trends, what are we seeing, what are intentions, that type of thing, and having some market supply and demand discussions with regard to seed. Seed acres, I just like to put up for, some people are curious in terms of the varieties. So this is just the top 20. CFIA actually produces a top 50 list. It just plugs up the screen. Hopefully you can see that there. But just out of interest, I wanted to highlight those varieties that are actually showing a decline, a steady decline. There are some varieties that go up and down every year, but remain fairly steady. Some that have shown a constant decline, and many of you are probably more familiar with the reasons behind that than I am, but I won't begin to lecture on that today, but just wanted to point that out. And then the ones in the green box are the ones that are on, have shown some significant increases. So we can see where they're coming from and what the trends are, at least from the registered or certified seed acres perspective. So, the seed industry does have a tougher time. They have all the cost of production that we do in a commercial growing, and some extra other costs, and the added risk. So I'm going to invest in a variety that I go through 4 years of seed, growing and breeding. And at the end of it, no, that's not going to work for our market, or it's not good for fresh, or whatever the case may be. So there is that added risk, and trying to get more information and give good information for the seed growers is definitely helpful for us. So getting any feedback that we can from the growers really helps us in terms of our communication with the other sectors. Because at the end of the day, one big potato pile, and we all do impact each other, the different sectors. So lots of challenges. It's not all bad news. There are lots of positives. As I said, global demand for frozen continues to grow. Consumer demand remains strong. We're on menus in the restaurant and food service. We continue to be on menus. The value per pound, dollar per pound in the retail is definitely still very strong for potatoes versus other vegetables. Possibilities for new export markets, we're looking at that, investigating that as a group in Canada. Not united necessarily, it's not really our mandate, but I know like PEI Potato Board works hard on your behalf on things like that. And continued improvements in production. So we can see that in our production total. We're doing varietal research, trying different varieties that work better, and improving that production even without returning to historical levels of planted acreage. So there is some good news there. So now it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. I'm saving some time for that part of it. Potential tariffs in the U.S. Obviously, it's the big question. It's the question I get the most from growers these days. I'm probably going to date myself with this question, but I don't know if anybody's a fan of David Letterman. But when I was putting together this question, all I could think about was Dave Letterman's top 10 lists. But anyway, so will he or won't he? If I had a crystal ball, I would be working in the stock market and making a lot of money. I can't really answer that question, as you know. He tends to be fairly erratic, and things change from day to day. So will he or won't we? I don't focus a lot of time on that question. I'd rather focus the time on what we can control, coming together as an industry, standing together as an industry, and working to improve the things that we can actually control. So what if the Mexico market becomes blocked or slowed for the U.S.? So will that back up supply into the U.S. and therefore leave no room for the Canadian potatoes? 2/3 of what goes into Mexico in terms of fresh shipments comes out of Colorado. So the bulk of what is being moved into Mexico does come from Colorado. There is some that comes from Idaho and a little bit from Texas. So will it back up? Certainly. I mean, if Colorado's not shipping it to Mexico, they're sitting in storage. However, as we just discussed, Colorado pace of movement to date is been very quick, and they're actually looking at sort of scaling back a bit in terms of can we keep this pace moving to make it through to new crops. So yes, it will back up. We'll see what the impact will be. I don't think it would make a huge dent. Idaho is so big. If you looked at that production figure, they produce more potatoes in Idaho than we produce in Canada across the whole country. So this scale is just so big. I don't think for them, the Mexico shipments would put a big dent in it. But it definitely is an issue. I've been speaking with Colorado. They just had their potato conference last week, and I said, what's the talk? What are people saying? And they said, yeah, we talked a lot about it. Everybody's concerned, but no action yet and no change in planting intentions to date. So everybody's sort of in a wait and see, but that's kind of the comment that I'm getting out of Colorado. Unfortunately, Idaho is as frustrating for the other regions in the U.S. as it is for us in Canada. They don't share a lot of information. They are so big that they do what they need to do. They have a lot of pressure from the Idaho Potato Commission. After 2 years of shortages, the pressure has been on last year and this year to regain that market share. And for them, market share is the number. Like, that is the key thing for them. So they will not give up on that. And so it will continue, and they're that big. But there was a follow-up question to that. Well, will Idaho change their planting intentions to gain the Northeast market? I don't have this from Idaho, but I just don't see it happening. It wouldn't put a dent. They already service the Northeast market. They go into the New York and Boston terminals. They rail it in. So it's not something new for them, and I just don't think that Northeast, they're just not making those connections, and it's not necessarily on their radar. They're just that big, and it wouldn't put necessarily a huge dent in terms of their production. Would they take advantage of being able to move extra potatoes into the Northeast if there was a resistance to taking Canadian potatoes because of the tariff? Yeah, they would. But there is no, hey, this is what we're doing, this is our plan at this point, that I have been told or heard or reported to. The other concern, of course, is handling border paperwork and tariffs. The only reason I mention that is I just want to make sure growers are very clear about what their rights and responsibilities are with regard to moving stuff across the border. The importer is responsible to pay the tariff. So just remember, you can deliver product, freight included, without being the importer of record or being responsible to pay those tariffs. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other is that custom brokerage firms are no longer going to be able to pay on your behalf and then collect it from you later. Most clearance companies will do all the clearance charges, pay any duties, whatever, because they were so few and far between. And then they would put it on your invoice and collect it in 30 or 45 or 60 days. They can't afford to do that with 25% across the board, every product going across the border. It's just too much. We're talking millions of dollars. So now it's going to be, you either pay up front, give us a US bank account, we'll do the remittance for you, but you're not going to have a line of credit anymore. They just can't afford to do it. So something also to keep in mind, that is going to be an issue moving forward for customs clearance. Planting intentions, that's the big question. What do we do? How do we, decide what our planting intentions are? We've got POs for seed sitting on our desk, and we don't know what we're doing, and we don't know if the tariffs are going to be there, and we don't know if we're going to be able to export. I really wish I could answer those questions for you. One, I just don't have the experience that you do to be able to answer that question. The best that I can do for you is to continue to provide the information. At the end of the presentation, my email will be there. Please feel free to write me with your questions. I will do my due diligence and my best effort to get the answer for you in terms of any specific question other than what should I plant. But it definitely is, I know, the biggest question on your mind: how will the tariffs impact it? I've tried to give you the information on terms of how it will impact. The reports I'm getting out of the Northeast U.S. are, we know we're going to have to pay the tariffs. We know we're going to have to pay more money. We also hope that the packers in the U.S. aren't going to leave the money on the table. In the business I'm from, when somebody puts their price up 25%, you put it up at least 20. I mean, why would you leave the money on the table and keep your pricing the same? So we're hoping all of those things will take into consideration. We have to remember our dollar is now, sitting at 70 cents. I think it went back up to 70 cents. So there's a 30% exchange rate that still runs in our favor at this point. There's a fine line between what's good for export and what hurts us at home, but to date, we're still running 30%. So at 25% tariffs, can we still remain competitive? So those are the things that I'm hearing, and yeah, the market is still there in the Northeast. They do not produce enough fresh potatoes for their markets. They need the Canadian potatoes coming in. Is Idaho an option? Yeah, the freight differential is there. It's not cheap to bring them in from the West, and the Idaho freight, as of last 2 weeks, has continued to go up. So we'll see in terms of how that goes. How will they impact contract negotiations for processing? Most people are saying, yeah, it's part of the conversation, but we're keeping it in mind. But it had, negotiations are going forward with regardless. So what are we doing on your behalf? Well, we have worked on our strategic plan. Which was an important part when I came into the role, was really to understand my mandate, the guidance for me, my action plan, what are the things I need to be working on moving forward. So we spent a lot of time with that. I mentioned earlier the 3 C's, which is collecting data, communication, and collaboration. So those are the things that I focus my actions on, back to those 3 C's on a constant basis. And there's a number of items that we're working on. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can, hopefully you can read those on screen. But several items we're working on with those values in mind. So forecast model for national shipments. So the goal being, we're not trying to find out what everybody's doing. We're not trying to share, your shipments with somebody else or anything like that. We want to look at a consolidated shipment to estimate the crop transition. What's it going to be from storage to new crop? Are we going to have a carryover? What's that going to look like? National data collection, application, and consolidation of all that data that you see that I've presented comes from multiple sources, multiple files. I'm trying to get that into one place to be able to better analyze more quickly. So when somebody calls me for a report and says, hey, can you give me the imports from Maine last year? I can just quickly pull that out of a database. So we're working hard on that. Consumption data, we've talked a lot about supply, and we continue to talk about supply. We want to talk about demand. What does the average potato consumer look like? And what are the trends in terms of food service and retail? So we're working on that at least on an annual basis. We're working with NRC. They were very interested in my project on the data collection and the forecast model to actually put climate data in there and look at how climate data is impacting production historically. So it's something interesting. And of course, we continue to work with all the industry associations on the collaboration piece, because it better helps us collect better data, more valid data, more accurate data. And so we work hard to do that on a regular basis. But we need your feedback. So like Kelly said earlier, when we're asking for some feedback, please feel free to give it to us no matter what it is. I don't like the suit you wore at your last presentation. I don't care. Whatever it is, we want to hear your feedback, because it helps us get the analysis done and more valid and accurate information back to you as growers. You can only make good decisions if you've got good data. So we want to make sure that you have it. I'll take a moment to say thank you to our sponsors. There's a few of you here in PEI, so thank you very much. I won't name any names, Allen Equipment, PEI Bag Company, so thank you very much for your support. We really appreciate it. FCC, of course, as well. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me today. I hope you've learned a little bit, or at least come away with some more questions you'd like to ask. And I will be at my booth, as I said, up front all day, so please feel free to stop by.
Any questions? We got time for one question for Victoria, one or two. Kevin.
Victoria, on your monthly calls on behalf of the U.S. growers, are they supportive of the tariffs, or are they against the tariffs?
Thank you. The question is my monthly calls with the U.S. and actually I am not only monthly but weekly on a call with the United Potato Growers of America and all their regional co-ops. The mood is they don't want it either. NPC, National Potato Council, has been very vocal on that fact as well. Probably more with regard to the Mexican border than the Canadian border, but regardless, they're advocating on the same page as we are. We don't want these tariffs. It's not productive for our potato growers. But to be honest, the other thing is there isn't necessarily a lot of talk about it. I don't know whether it's they're far removed from it. They're talking about it in Colorado because they're close to the Mexican border. Some of the others that aren't bringing in as many fresh potatoes from Canada, maybe not talking about it as much. So it varies depending on the region and their proximity to market and the potential impact on their market for that.
Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you.